Hi everyone, it's Sandy, and today I am finally doing my December wrap-up. I had a pretty good reading month because I ended up reading 9 books, which is definitely one of the better reading months that I've had all year, so we're just going to jump right in because I have a lot to talk about. The first book that I read is The Girl in 6E by A.R. Torr. This book follows a woman who has locked herself up in her apartment, and it's been 3 years since she stepped outside. The reason she did that is because every time she sees someone, she wants to kill them. This book sounds really interesting, but I thought it was a bit underwhelming. It was interesting to read about the main character's profession. In order to make a living, the main character is a cam girl. However, I thought there would be more of a focus on her obsession with killing, and I thought the ending didn't really flesh out how her urges changed that well. The main character's job does come into play quite a lot throughout the entire book, and while it was interesting to see, I just kind of wanted more of a focus on a different storyline that takes place in this book. There are multiple point of views in this book, and you'll find out why when you pick this up, because there is like an additional storyline. I really like seeing how those point of views tie together at the end of the story. The main character's backstory would be included every now and then throughout the entire book. I didn't think those chapters flowed very well with what's happening in the present. It just kind of seemed out of place at times. Going into this book, I knew that it was a psychological thriller, and it was kind of disappointing compared to other psychological thrillers that I've read. I still liked it, but it didn't really meet my expectations of what I wanted to see. But overall, I can definitely see why people enjoyed this book, and I do recommend it if you're interested in picking it up. I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is The Midnight Star by Marie Lu. This is the third and final book in the Young Elites. If you don't know what the Young Elites is, it basically takes place in a world where there has been this plague that swept through the entire world. The people who have survived this plague are left with this marking, and they're called Malfetos. Some of those Malfetos have developed this superhero-like power, and our main character Adelina has developed the power to create illusions. The entire story is definitely an anti-hero story. After finishing this book, I didn't really have the feeling that I finished a book, if that makes sense. So what I'm trying to say is that this book didn't really feel complete. I felt like a majority of the book was just boring, and it didn't feel like anything was happening. I did like the last 1/3 of the book. The ending definitely took unexpected turns, and what I loved about Adelina's character throughout the entire series is that although she doesn't always make the best decisions, you're constantly rooting for her and you're sympathizing with her. And I also really like seeing her relationship with her sister develop throughout the entire book. The ending was definitely bittersweet, and I ended up giving this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished was a disappointing read, and it is The Last Star by Rick Yancey. This is the third and final book in the Fifth Wave. The Fifth Wave is basically this alien invasion story. I actually listened to this book as an audiobook. Before going to this book, I did not remember anything that happened in the previous books, so I looked up 2 different recaps of the first 2 books, and going into this book, I was still super confused. I had no idea what was happening. I just could not get into the story, and since I listened to this as an audiobook, I found myself bored listening to the story, and I was constantly zoning out and having to go back to replay what just happened. Also, something big happened at the end of the book, and I didn't realize what happened till I finished the book, and I was just like, what the hell? I don't know where my mind was when I was listening to this book, but I really didn't like this book, and I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5 stars, but thinking about it, I might just give it a 1 out of 5 stars because I really didn't enjoy this book. I can't even pinpoint one thing I like about this book, so yeah, I'm probably changing my rating to a 1 out of 5 stars. On a positive note, the next book that I finished was one that I really enjoyed, and it is Every Last Word by Tamara Ireland Stone. This book follows Sam, who has OCD, and she's a part of the popular crowd, but none of her friends know that she has OCD. One day she meets this girl named Caroline who introduces her to this poet's corner. At this corner, people basically share their poetry, and Sam begins to find a place where she feels like she belongs. I really enjoyed this book. I don't have OCD, so I can't say whether the OCD is portrayed accurately. The author did mention that she did extensive research. She talked to mental health professionals, and she also has a friend who has OCD who she talked to. I really like that the author debunks the popular misconception that OCD is about being neat and being organized. I'm not completely sure, but I believe Sam's OCD is purely obsessional. She has a lot of obsessive thoughts. She does have a few compulsions, but it's mainly on the obsessional side. I immediately connected to Sam's character. I thought the writing was beautiful. One thing that I really like about this book is that the author portrays a relationship with a therapist, especially a positive relationship. I think it's really important to include that in books because I feel like some people have negative perceptions about seeing a therapist, and I really love that the author includes several scenes of Sam meeting with her therapist and talking about what's going on in her life. This book ended up becoming a favorite of of mine in 2016, and I ended up giving it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. This story follows Connor, whose mother is dying of cancer, and at night he is visited by a monster who tells him 3 different stories in order to get him to come to terms with this truth that he's been hiding. This is a beautiful story. I love the illustrations in it. I didn't enjoy this book as much as a lot of other people did, but I love the different themes that it deals with, such as bullying. This book definitely got me feeling very emotional, and I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished is Crystal Storm by Morgan Rhodes. This is the 5th book in the Fallen Kingdoms series. Fallen Kingdoms is basically a fantasy series. It's difficult to explain what the book is about because there are multiple point of views, and each point of view kind of have their own individual storyline, and as the story goes on they do interweave with one another, but it's definitely very complex, so I'm going to leave it at that. I really don't have much to say about this book because it is the 5th book and I can't really talk about it without giving away any spoilers, but I am going to say that I really enjoyed it. I still think the 4th book is my favorite in the series so far. I still think it's a good sequel, and I'm really excited to see what happens in the 6th and final book when it comes out next year. I give this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is These Shallow Graves by Jennifer Donnelly. This is a historical mystery book that takes place in the 1890s following a girl named Jo, whose father has accidentally killed himself while cleaning out his gun. Later on, she finds out that her father's death wasn't an accident and that it was actually a murder. So throughout this book, she and this reporter that she meets go on this investigation in order to find out who killed her dad and what actually happened. I also listened to this as an audiobook. I do really like how the author portrayed the time period, especially taking place in the 1890s. There are a lot of restrictions on women. I think Jo was a wonderful character. Jo comes from a privileged family, and while there are a lot of expectations of her that she needs to fulfill, I love that she was constantly trying to break out of the social norm of her time period. She definitely pursues after what she wants, but she can also be naive at times. I really liked her character development throughout the story, and I thought the ending was so fitting for her character. The main thing that brought my rating down for this book is the pacing and the length of the story. This book is almost 500 pages, and there were definitely times where I felt like the story dragged and I just wanted it to have a faster pace. However, I do really like the characters, and I love how the author was able to portray a wide range of characters from different backgrounds. I ended up giving this book a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished in December is On the Fence by Casey West, and it follows our main character Charlotte, who goes by the name Charlie. Her family consists of a single dad and 3 brothers, so she basically grew up in a house full of boys. She's really interested in doing the things that her brother does, like playing sports, and she's not really interested in being feminine. One day she gets a speeding ticket, and her dad punishes her by saying that she has to pay the speeding ticket, so she ends up getting this job at this store that has like a lot of women clothing and products for women, and she's also falling for her next door neighbor Brayden. In November, I read P.S. I Like You, which was my first Casey West book, and I really loved it. I was really excited to read more Casey West books, but this book didn't like it. I ended up giving it a 1 out of 5 stars. Maybe if I read this book when I was like a freshman or sophomore in high school, I would enjoy it more. But there was just a lot of little things in this book that annoyed me, and it built up to the point where I just couldn't take it anymore. I literally wanted to throw this book across the room several times while reading. The book was just full of cliches and tropes. Some I usually would enjoy, but I just didn't like the way it was written in this book. I just felt like the writing and Charlie's character just felt really childish. Charlie has 3 older brothers, and honestly they all just felt like one person to me. There really wasn't any differentiation between the 3 of them. While I do really like her relationship with her brothers, I just felt like all the characters weren't really fleshed out and weren't well developed. Although Charlie is a tomboy and really wasn't into like makeup, doing her hair, dressing up, and other stuff like that, I just felt like she was bashing people who are into it, and she was constantly making assumptions of what normal girls do and perceiving it as something negative to be partaking in. I just didn't like that, and I thought the romance was so cringy. There's a point in this book where she realizes her feelings for her next door neighbor, and that moment just had me rolling my eyes. The ending itself was a little bit cute, I do have to admit, but the overall like romance and relationship just felt very sudden. Also, there were issues in this book that the author briefly mentions, and I wanted her to go more in depth about those issues, but she kind of just briefly mentions it and moves on. And yeah, that's basically all I have to say about this book. I ended up giving it a 1 out of 5 stars, so moving on. And the last book that I read is The Perfectionist by Sarah Shepard. This book follows 5 girls who have nothing in common. They do have a class together, and in that class they come up with a plan to kill a person named Nolan who has done terrible things to each of them. And then one day Nolan ends up dead in the exact way that they planned, but the thing is, none of them did it. The name Sarah Shepard may be familiar to most of you because she is the author of Pretty Little Liars, and this book definitely had that Pretty Little Liars vibe. So if you're interested in that show or the books, I definitely recommend this book. I did enjoy reading this book and I read through it pretty quickly. This book is told in 5 different point of views, so at first it was confusing as to who is who, but it didn't take long for me to figure out. I really like that each character has their own personal drama to deal with, and then there's that overarching storyline with Nolan's murder. I do wish there was more of a focus on the murders, but the individual storylines definitely did keep me engaged, and I ended up rating this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I will definitely be reading the next book. I'm not completely sure, but I think it's a duology. I forgot to mention earlier, but I actually did DNF a book this month, and that book is 3 Dark Crowns. I was listening to this book as an audiobook. This book follows 3 sisters who eventually have to fight to the death in order to become queen, and honestly I just felt bored listening to it. This book also had a bunch of side characters' point of views in it, and I just really wasn't interested. And honestly, the only sister that I cared about was Catherine. The other sisters didn't care. The other side characters didn't care. I just didn't want to listen to this book anymore, so I decided to DNF it. I most likely will pick this book up again in the future, but probably not as an audiobook. I think I will just read it myself. If you've read this book, let me know what you thought about it. Is it worth continuing? Should I just leave it as DNF? Those are all the books that I read in December. Let me know what books you've read in December, and if you've read any of these books, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you next time. Bye!